And in the pages I have left, we're going to now talk about the technology, which most people thought is where we were going to start, and it's where we're ending today. Because this is where my work in the world, for most of the people that are listening today, started, was on technology. So I'm going to start with things I think are maybe the biggest things to be concerned about. And the first one is artificial intelligence, AI, which is getting a lot of press now, but it has in my lexicon for a couple of decades. Artificial intelligence has gotten so complex that computers now program themselves in such a complex way that humans cannot figure out the code. Okay, so now we cannot keep up with the coding that computers do for themselves. What's happening with this is computers don't have the human qualities, but they'll get really good at predicting. And we've talked a lot about how they can do that. They can predict better than you. They can tell more about you than you know about you. They can push you around and do it, and it's going to get better and more refined and more perfect the more information is collected. The goal is to collect everything, to know everything about you so you are totally predictable. And that's where we're headed, for commercial reasons and for other reasons. The commercial reasons are obvious. China's reasons are obvious. They're the same outcomes, the same systems, different justifications for having them, but they result in the same thing, a more directed and controlled society. I don't think we want that. To gain our privacy back, we have to stop the digital doorway being kicked in. It happened gradually. None of us understood it while it was happening, but we can clearly see it now. Are we going to have AI running our lives by dissecting us into something that we're not, and then treating us and hurting us like cattle into whatever belief system they're trying to capture us within? Because that's really what it's about. It's about the reality industry. It's about taking your data and then creating a new narrative, they call it. You know what a narrative is? It's called a script, right? It's a script. It's like a play. They want a new narrative. What the hell are they talking about? We don't need narratives. We need lives with people living them, not making up scripts from focus groups and polling. This is what politics is. It's getting a little information from a focus group, figuring out what people want to say and see. We poll a few, we figure it out, and then we package it all up nice and neat so they'll swallow it all. Or we shove it up another way if they're not taking it the right way. And this is how it is. Your information used to manipulate you in doing what they can predict you'll do. Is that democracy? Is that a republic? Is that a life worth living? It's a life worth changing. It's a life worth grabbing back and taking back. Technology, the second one on the list, robotics. Everybody's worried about the robot taking your job, right? Because a robot at McDonald's will do 300 burgers an hour. An hour. And they don't file workers' comp claims and they don't complain. And now, you know what they're doing with robotics? They're making robotics that are self-repairing and self-replicating, so they can make more of themselves and fix themselves, and they don't need you involved at all. And because they can evolve their program so fast, we can't even keep up with them. If they have a bigger problem, they can probably unknot that too. Because it's not about feeling or believing for robots, it's just about how do we fix the widget. And that's not much deciding, but they're really good at it. And that wipes out a bunch of jobs. It's not just the guy at McDonald's. 9,000 bankers in one institution got wiped out and replaced by AI that now decides who's qualified for loans, and you don't have a personal banker involved. You have an algorithm looking at your picture as it's painted in the world of data bits, all those data bits. And that decides what your credit score is, which is similar to a social score, if you think about it. That's what's going on. Robotics are here. Think about drones as a technology. I was making drones in 1980 at Texas Instruments. Now, people didn't know there were drones 40 years ago, I'll bet. And they were the kind that you'd kick out of an airplane and they'd hover. They were anti-radiation drones, so they'd pick up radars. And they would determine which radar they had. Was it a fixed radar station, a mobile station, or what? Because in order to get an airplane out of the sky, you needed to triangulate a position. So you either got the radars to shut off because there was a drone circling that had a charge on its nose, and when it got to a certain elevation, it would say, ah, now I'm getting you. And that's how it works. So it's a denial system. Either turn the radars off and you didn't worry and your planes made it by, or you turn the radar on and you lost the radar and that was the end of the story. So we were making them back then for NATO and for Turkey and for the Navy, and then we were doing the HARM missile for the Navy. That was a project I was on, but this is a big building with a lot of little pods running off of it in Carrollton, Texas. So technology even then was pretty amazing. That factory didn't get duplicated in terms of efficiency until they were building factories in China in 2000. Before that, the factory I worked in for Texas Instruments was the most modern factory in the U.S. at the time for electronics, for big electronics like we're talking about. Warfare in the future won't involve people. Think about it. Drones already are in the game, lots and lots of them. They make the decisions. There's an operator in Missouri running a drone in Afghanistan, killed a few people this afternoon, hit the barbecue after work. But that got pretty disturbing, so they started distorting some of that so you didn't see what you were doing quite so clearly. Kind of cartoonized it a little bit so you didn't feel so bad about who you were killing that day. But when it's easy to kill people, we'll kill a lot more of them. The reason that people came back from World War I particularly, even the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, they didn't want their kids seeing what they saw, living through what they saw, Afghanistan more recently, Iraq. They don't want their kids doing that. They do everything they can to avoid war. That's what military people with experience in combat do. They don't want their families in that. They expect their government to keep them out of that every chance they get and not put our sons and daughters in harm's way. Because most of these wars aren't for us. They're for industry. We're not gladiators for industry. That isn't what we are. We weren't about meddling in everyone else's business when we formed this country. We were about creating a different place that people would see as a witness to the world, that you could have a government by the people, of the people, and for the people. So others would be encouraged to try the same thing, have their own revolution in their own country. And we interfere with it every time it happens. At the Mexican border, they've tried a couple times to have revolutions there. Clinton stopped them back when it was on the Yucatan Peninsula. He stopped them. We interfered. We sent money. Shouldn't have done that. You think they didn't have a right to get rid of their corrupt government at the time, their drug cartel-infested government? Now their solution was in their government. They got 200 of the people in the AG's office implanted with a microchip to track wherever they went, and everybody went, 3 cheers, we got rid of the corruption. No, you didn't. Now they could never blow the whistle on everyone or anyone, because every move at the top, everyone was tracked. And it wasn't to make you safer in Mexico. It was to keep track of them so nobody was telling how corrupt it really was. So here we are, we back the play of these corrupt governments and wonder how come their people, 10% of the Mexican population is running across our border. Why not? You know, I mean, people want to live free, but if we're supporting this, how come we had a problem in Iran? Because we put the Shah there. We interfered with elections in the 50s. We put the Shah of Iran there, and he killed lots of people. He was a bloodthirsty guy. When he got in trouble because they revolted, because he was revolting, and we did this, and they were mad at us, and we go, how come they're mad at us? That's why they were mad at us. CIA did that. Look it up. Why was there an Osama bin Laden? Because the CIA made him when he was fighting the Russians in Afghanistan. You know, we got to look back in history. We create our villains because we're dealing with unethical people that don't represent American values. Why are we doing that? Why are we in places where we have to bribe governments for cooperation? They're not a threat to us. Do we need to be there? Do we need 800 military bases Russia has one off of their own property, and it's sitting in Syria, as I understand it. We have 800 all over the place and get upset anytime anyone else goes anywhere. What are we doing, and are we the world's police? We didn't start that way. We were going to be an example, not a baseball bat for the world, an example of something different. And that's what we've forgotten in all of this. The ease of killing will just make more of it. I've talked about systems of control and quantum computing. I've talked about how powerful quantum computing is. Put that on this matrix we've been talking about, and freedom's gone. We're at the 11th hour on a lot of this. It's not over with. It only takes one, the right one, people who step into their gifts and their potentials. Lots can change. I've talked about the power of technology. I've talked a little bit about the Revolution of Military Affairs, the RMA, but I want to mention it again because it was too brief. The RMA was done by the U.S. Army War College in the 1980s, and it was looking at technology that was coming. A lot of the technologies that I've talked about over the years on privacy, particularly privacy. And what they said in this paper is that the public would never stand for these technologies because they violated the Constitution of the United States. However, they said, the U.S. Army War College, remember, training our officers, but there's a way around this. Now think about this for a minute. They first say it's going to violate the Constitution, but it's important enough to kind of forget that. I don't want them training any of my military officers representing me in the world. I want them believing the Constitution does matter. And what they said is the way they could avoid that is they create an environment of fear generated by international terrorism and international drug trafficking. Now you look at the column inches. Now you look at the column inches in what happens in that regard. Hundreds and hundreds of papers covering international drug trafficking and international terrorism. And you know, international terrorism as a single item in terms of killing people, didn't kill as many as medical malpractice last year in America alone. And how many inches of newsprint got medical malpractice? I can't remember any articles unless there were really crazy ones, like somebody scratching their initials in somebody's stomach or some stupid thing like this. But short of that, I don't see it. It's not reported. But what we've done to shut down American freedom for fear of terrorism sure has changed our lives. What we've done in all of these areas have changed our lives. And in that, when I think about this, again talking about technologies, what they were talking about were technologies that were so different, so radically different, that what they would create in the future is a technocracy, because it would be weapon systems that weren't bullets and bombs anymore. Be electromagnetic systems designed for controlled effects, what the electromagnetic of the Air Force had developed. What these controlled effects represent in us now is 5 things. They looked at all of our 5 senses and overriding those, as I explained earlier, but also systems that would attack hardware, the computer systems that operate equipment, that would operate the computer systems, that would operate the controls, and a way to override that by sending in energy, pulsed energy in such a way where it would create bit errors on the computers, cause them to fail, cause them to fail and not operate. Or more energy even that would cause circuits to literally melt. Or very subtle energies that would override the operating system of the human being, which in fact was the operating system where the mind has no firewalls. And that's an article, and I mentioned it earlier, you can look it up. It's by Perimeters, a publication for the military, and it's actually the translation of a Russian article. There's also one that I had a number of years ago of a Chinese article, and these are Russian-Chinese military papers that made it into circulation. And they talk about all the different ways to affect the mind. There was a special on CBC TV in Canada, one of the most well-watched programs in Canada, that talked about mind control, and I was a part of that. When they interviewed the folks from the Russian side, they used a method for sending a noise out on the street, like white noise, and in it were subtle messages that caused people working on the street to come in at various times of the day and deliver little cakes, which they use at tea time. And so all that was going on based on mind control effects that were being operated by essentially this group of experimenters. But they did a lot of things. They did one that was called the 25th frame effect, which every 25th frame had a message in it that would be absorbed and remembered by the person observing it. When you think about the whole idea of influencing what's in the brains, this is like one of the major areas of military interest. And I talked about some of this earlier, the idea of looking at what a person is thinking and then influencing behavior. What they were thinking about there was a couple things. One is as a way to communicate with your own troops covertly and quietly. And the other was to disrupt the thoughts of your adversaries to confuse them. That's always been part of the program. If you can affect the human being, then all the equipment they have is worthless. So if you can use small amounts of energy to influence the operating system of a human being and shut them down, essentially you don't destroy anything in the battlefield physically that you're going to have to replace except for human beings. But they become the collateral damage and the property is saved. These kinds of weapons that are being developed were being developed at one point between the military and the Department of Justice in the guise of non-lethal. They didn't kill, but they could affect people. So they had a joint initiative. It started in the 1980s, continued through the 90s, where they transferred from DoD, Department of Defense, technologies to police departments around the country, various kinds, and they continued to do that in the non-lethal realm. Again, a way of moving this out of the federal hands and into the general public use. Military and Department of Justice, the overlays. Starting in the 1980s, a lot of this was done through Johns Hopkins University. In terms of non-lethal weapons, they held one of the big studies in this area was done at Johns Hopkins. They're the same ones doing a lot of this COVID stuff right now, just by coincidence. But these are government contractors, something to remember. The Freedom of Information Act requests don't apply to these contractors, and these nonprofits or universities are contractors too. That's where the holes are that need to be filled, especially in the area of technology. People not being trained in science in the government right now, in Congress, they go into a closed hearing, no notes, no staff, no conversations. This is really not governance when technology decides who's strong and who's weak in the world in terms of countries. Energy weapons I've talked enough about. I've talked enough about a lot of that. HARP I won't revisit a lot. I'll just talk a little bit about it just because it's part of my original work. I have a lot online at Earth Pulse on that. There's a lot online everywhere on that. But what it really was that caught me is HARP was this big system that would electronically stroke the ionosphere in just the right way to affect populations over a whole hemisphere. That's what J.F. Gordon McDonald was talking about in the book by Zabinski that I quoted from. When you think about all of this and you think about the effects of systems, when we're talking about literally manipulating a part of the environment and changing it deliberately from a DC to an AC current, taking the entire energetic system and alter it from direct current to alternating current, where it's pulsing at a very specific way to have a very specific effect, and to be used as part of a weapon system. Think about it, HARP as a primer on a bullet. It's the bullet and the gunpowder where the real explosion is. So think about the environment as being the part of the bullet where the real explosion is. And man is the primer. And we're playing God in the universe right now, in the earth, with technologies at a level we've never done before, with transparency that isn't there across many platforms. HARP for me was a beginning, and it's changed a lot. The technology's altered. What I will say is the direction of energy warfare is the direction of modern warfare. You see it playing out. Robotics is moving in to fill the place of humans even there. People are being replaced with machines everywhere you look. Where do people fit in this culture now? Where are we going to fit in 10 or 20 years? And what are the possibilities that our children have? That's kind of where we're headed. You know, some of the other areas I haven't mentioned or spoken about in my other books. Underwater sonars, another area that's being affected a lot. You see the beachings all across the world. Those are low frequency sonars and others within the oceans operating. I did a lot of that work back in 2002, 2003. When Jim Roderick was still alive, I was invited to a conference in Bar Harbor, Maine with a bunch of PhDs in environmental sciences, and they wanted me there, and it was a Marine Mammal Commission that put this together, and some universities, and they wanted me there to talk about energy weapons as such, and from the broader perspective, and then within the oceans. And what we do with sound waves in the oceans, they travel very efficiently in water. And so marine mammals like whales, they can hear low frequency sounds over many, many miles, 3,000 miles of ocean. And the reason they can is in the oceans you have salt levels that are different with depth and temperature levels, and in a certain level you can create like a signal barrier which keeps the signal trapped, so it carries a long distance. And whales communicate this way with sound, but it's very quiet, subtle, certain frequencies that transmit easily. Then what we do as humans is we introduce sonar, which is the equivalent of putting a megaphone next to that whale's ear and talking really loud. It blows out their eardrums, how they hear and how they orient. And that's why they beach. When they do the investigation and they open them up and see, it's hemorrhaging that happens. The same kind of hemorrhaging that happens when you race to the surface as a diver too fast. The same thing happens. Because they're being yelled at in a way that totally breaks the eardrum as all that energy transfers. Because in air, only a small amount of acoustic energy transfers. In salt water, most of it does. So the impact is a hammer. And this is what we're doing. Underwater sonars, yeah, we get to find the quiet subs now, but we wipe out the natural submarines that are already there. You know, electromagnetic fields, which is the big thing that we've talked a bit about, it's been our problem today is the fields that we're immersed in here, and we picked up some of it. You know, they're not working like we had planned. But there's a company, Swiss Reinsurance. They underwrite big insurance company risks, and they write risks all over the world. The risks they won't write, wireless. They will not underwrite for mobile phone companies or anyone else liability related to the wireless world, because the research already shows them, and this is from 2000, this is old. They were telling the industry it's going to be the biggest set of lawsuits someday. It's going to dwarf tobacco. It's going to dwarf Firestone and all the big litigation we've seen. Because this one is the big one. Wireless, they can't cover the potential losses. And you'll see it. It's already merging in our health statistics, lowering of our general health. You'll see more of that as time goes on. The answer will be energy medicine. I alluded to it. As the months go on and the years go on, and as I continue to report, there'll be a lot to report in these areas. I'm not going to report much more on that.